never meant for any of this to happen. She was just another customer. Quiet, composed, impossible to read. But the way she looked at me, it felt like she saw every version of who I wanted to become. And the night she whispered, "No one has to know," I realized some connections don't ask for permission, they just happen. I first saw her on a Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where the world felt too loud outside and strangely calm inside. I was working my shift at the cafe, half tired, half distracted, wiping down the counter as the last wave of customers drifted out. And then she walked in. Not dramatically, not like a scene meant to be noticed. She entered quietly, as though she was trying to disturb the air as little as possible. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling free as if the day had worn her down just enough to soften her. She wore a long, dark coat, elegant, but lived in, the sort of clothing that didn't demand attention but drew it anyway. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. She just moved with a familiar grace to the register. Her voice was gentle when she ordered chamomile tea, no sugar. Most people rush their words. She didn't. She spoke like someone who had learned the beauty of taking her time. I handed her the tea, and in doing so our fingers brushed. Barely. It was nothing, really. A moment shorter than a breath. And yet I noticed it. Not the touch, but what it revealed. Her hands were warm. Not shaky. Not cold. Just warm. Warm like someone who carries a steady fire under the surface. She thanked me and moved to the window seat, the one with the soft yellow light pooling over the wooden tabletop. The kind of light that makes a person look like a memory in progress. She sat there, back straight, shoulders relaxed, like she'd done this before. Like this cafe was her quiet corner of the world. Even if I had never seen her until then. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't open a laptop. She just sat, looking out at the street like she was watching something only she could see. Or maybe she was trying not to think at all. That was the first thing I noticed about her. The stillness. Not the forced kind, but the kind people earn after a long life of carrying things quietly. I kept working, but my eyes went back to her more times than I want to admit. Not in a hungry way, not in a longing way, just in a drawn way. Like something about her steadiness made the rest of the room feel more grounded. The next day she came in again. Same time, same tea, same seat. By the third day, I realized I had started listening for the soft jingle of the door around that hour. And when she walked in, I felt myself straighten up just a little. Not to impress her, but to meet her where she existed. On that quiet wavelength. Slow, gentle, present. I didn't speak to her beyond the exchange at the counter. And she didn't speak more than was needed. But something had already begun. Something small. Something warm. Something that didn't ask permission. It just settled quietly between us. The rain came down in sheets that evening. The kind that makes the whole world soften at the edges, like it's trying to hush itself. The cafe was quieter than usual. Just a few lingering customers tapping at laptops and the low hum of music in the background. I was wiping down tables when the door opened, and she stepped inside. But she didn't look like she usually did. Her hair was damp, small droplets clinging to the strands near her temples. Her coat was darkened with rain, and she looked tired. Not just physically. Something deeper, like life had pressed a hand between her shoulders and pushed. That was the first time I felt something more than curiosity. I felt concern. I grabbed a towel from behind the counter and walked toward her before I could overthink it. "You look like the rain one," I said softly, offering the towel. She let out a breath, half a laugh, half exhaustion, and took it with a grateful nod. "Today was a lot," she murmured, gently drying her hands. There was no dramatic pause, no cinematic spark, just a quiet opening. Like a door she didn't realize she had left ajar. She ordered her usual tea, though her voice sounded a touch thinner. I prepared it with more care than necessary. Slower, gentler, and when I handed it to her, our eyes met properly for the first time. Not a glance, an actual seeing. She chose the window seat again. But this time, instead of watching the world outside, she just sat and breathed. I found myself wandering near her table more than I needed to, pretending to arrange sugar packets or straighten chairs. Finally, I asked, softly, "Rough day?" Her eyes flicked up, cautious, but not closed. She told me about work, not in detail but in feeling. The pressure. The constant expectation to be composed. How people at her office relied on her, admired her, yet somehow never really saw her. "And you?" she asked, surprising me. Her voice was warm but searching. "No one ever asked me that." "Not really." So we talked. Not about big things, about music, quiet places, the books we return to because they feel like home. She spoke with the kind of softness that invites honesty without asking for it. And I found myself telling her small truths, the kind you don't realize mean something until you say them aloud. Her hand brushed my wrist when she reached for her cup. Just a simple touch. But it lingered. Not by accident. Not by mistake. Just long enough to acknowledge something. Her eyes lowered, but the corner of her mouth lifted, just slightly. "Thank you," she said, though I wasn't sure what for. The towel? The tea? The space? The listening? Maybe all of it. And when she left that night, her shoulders looked lighter. I watched her go, and realized I wasn't just noticing her anymore. I was waiting for her. The days didn't change on the surface. The cafe stayed warm and mellow, the evenings stayed slow, and she still walked in with that same quiet grace. Yet something was undeniably different now. It wasn't about the tea or the window seat anymore. It was about presence. About how the air seemed to adjust itself when she walked in, as if the room remembered her. And I realized I did too. I began to recognize the subtle rhythm of her. The way she always paused for half a second before speaking, like she was choosing words with intention. The way her eyes softened when she listened. Not pretending, not waiting for her turn. Listening. She started asking about me more often. Not casually, not out of politeness, curiously. "What are you studying? What made you choose that? Are you happy here?" No one had asked me that last one before. I told her about my classes, my unfinished plans, the blurry idea of who I was still trying to become. She didn't rush to fill the silence when I had trouble finding words. She let me take my time the same way she did with everything. And in return, she shared little pieces of herself. Not the polished, composed version the world saw, but the woman behind it. How she sometimes felt like she was existing inside a script written long ago. How she kept moving because stopping meant noticing what was missing. How she had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen, not depended on. There was no confession, no declaration, just truth, exchanged gently, like passing something fragile from one set of hands to another. One evening, the cafe was nearly empty. The music was soft, a slow jazz track that wrapped itself around the quiet. She laughed at something I said. A real laugh, unguarded, warm enough to make other people turn their heads. She touched my forearm again when she laughed. Quick, instinctive. But this time, I didn't look away. I looked at her smile, at the faint lines near her eyes that only made her more beautiful, at the softness in her expression when our eyes stayed locked just a second too long. Something inside both of us acknowledged it. Not spoken, not labeled, but felt. And that feeling followed me even after she left. I found myself thinking about her voice while I walked home. The warmth of it. The way she said my name like it had weight, not just sound. And she, in her quiet way, had started lingering after conversations. Leaving slower, turning back as if to say more, though she never did. We were still standing on opposite sides of a line. Nothing had happened, but the world on either side of that line had shifted. And we both knew it. It happened on a night that didn't feel special at first. The cafe was closing. The lights dimmed to that late evening amber glow that makes everything softer, closer. I was wiping down the tables, stacking chairs, moving through familiar motions, and she was still there. She wasn't pretending to work, or to read, or to check messages. She just stayed. Her teacup sat empty in front of her. Her hands were folded loosely around her wrist, elbows resting on the table. She looked peaceful. Not because life had become easier, but because here, she didn't have to brace herself for anyone. I didn't ask why she hadn't left. I didn't need to. I finished the last of the cleaning, turned the sign to closed, and started to stack the final chairs. And without a word, she stood and began helping, gently, casually, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Are you sure?" I asked, half laughing. She smiled, that small, real smile that carried warmth more than amusement. "I don't mind," she said. "It feels nice, ordinary." It struck me how much she longed for simplicity, how extraordinary an ordinary moment could feel to someone who was always holding everything together. We moved quietly, side by side. When we reached for the same chair, our hands touched. More intentionally than before, though neither of us would admit it aloud. This time, neither of us pulled away. The moment didn't explode. There was no dramatic music, no sudden rush. It was slow. Slow enough to feel everything. Her fingers stayed on mine, warm, steady, certain. Our eyes lifted at the same time. Her breath caught, and mine stopped entirely. We stood so close that I could feel her warmth in the space between us. Not touching everywhere, just enough. Her eyes softened first. The kind of soft that carries a story behind it. A story of hesitation, of wanting, of knowing she shouldn't, and wanting anyway. She stepped back. Not quickly, not abruptly, just enough to restore the distance, the literal space between us, but not the emotional one. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "We shouldn't blur the lines," she said, almost to herself. There was no reprimand in her tone, no fear, just honesty. A truth she was trying to convince herself of more than me. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I respected her. The silence that followed was its own language. A silence full of what we weren't saying. "I feel it too. I don't know what to do with it. I don't want it to stop." She picked up her coat slowly, smoothing the sleeve with a distracted hand. She lingered at the door. One last look back, just for a heartbeat. Her eyes held mine, soft, conflicted, wanting. "Good night," she whispered. When the door closed behind her, the cafe felt too quiet, too still. That night, I didn't just think about her. I missed her. Not her presence, her closeness. The closeness we almost let happen. The storm rolled in just after sunset. Not the dramatic kind with thunder and flashing skies, but a soft, steady rainfall that made the world feel dim and intimate. The kind of rain that slows everything down and makes silence feel heavier, more meaningful. She came in late that night. Her hair was damp, her shoulders slightly hunched as though the day had been carrying her rather than the other way around. I didn't need to ask. I could feel it the moment I saw her. Some days press harder than others. The cafe was mostly empty. Only a few scattered lights still lit as we approached closing time. I brought her usual tea before she ordered, setting it gently in front of her. She looked up at me, surprised, and something in her expression cracked open just a little. Not broken, just unguarded. "You always notice," she said softly. I didn't respond right away. Some moments don't need immediate words. When we closed for the night, she didn't stand to leave. Instead, she looked out toward the rain-soaked street and asked quietly, "Would you walk with me? Just for a bit?" There was no hesitation in me. Of course. We stepped into the rain together, not running, not shielding ourselves. The city lights blurred into soft halos against the wet pavement. Our footsteps fell in an easy rhythm, side by side, as if we'd walked like that 100 times before. She didn't speak at first. I didn't push. Finally, while standing beneath the awning of a closed bookstore, she exhaled, the kind of breath that carries something heavy. "I feel like I've been living on autopilot," she said. "Like I move through my days doing all the things I'm supposed to do, but none of it touches me anymore." She didn't look at me. She looked somewhere far away, maybe inside herself. I listened, not to respond, but to understand. She talked about her responsibilities, her son, her work, her expectations of herself. How everyone sees her as strong, efficient, stable. How no one ever asks if she's tired. How strange, she whispered, voice trembling just slightly, to be surrounded by people who need you and still feel unseen. The rain pattered softly around us, like it understood. I don't know what moved me, but I spoke quietly. "Honestly, I see you. She looked at me then. Really looked. Not like someone searching for reassurance, but like someone hearing the truth for the first time in a long while. Her eyes glistened. Not with tears, but with a softness that comes when walls begin to lower. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch beyond the closeness of standing there together, breathing in the same hesitant air. But something shifted. Something deep. She whispered, barely audible, as though afraid the world might ruin it. You make me feel alive. The words hung between us, delicate, sacred. And in that moment, the space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with everything we weren't saying yet, but were already feeling. The walk back to her building was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like the air between us had finally learned to speak. The rain had softened to a mist, leaving the pavement shining like glass. Streetlights cast a warm, golden haze over everything, turning the night into something soft and close. She walked a small step ahead of me, her hands in her coat pockets, her shoulders just barely leaning in my direction, as if her body already knew something her mind was still trying to reason through. When we reached her building, she paused at the entrance, fingers resting lightly on the railing. She didn't unlock the door right away. Instead, she stood still, breathing in that slow, steady way she did when she was fighting with herself silently. I stepped closer. Not too close, just enough for her to feel I was there, not leaving. She turned toward me, and her eyes held so much steadiness, hesitation, hope, fear, longing, all layered in a way that made her look even more human, even more beautiful. This is where I should say good night, she said softly. Her voice wasn't firm. It wasn't even sure. It was gentle, like someone standing at the edge of something they've wanted for a long time. I nodded slowly, giving her space to choose. I didn't want to take anything. I wanted to meet something. She looked down at her hands, then up at me again, and something in her gaze changed. Not dramatically, just opened. I reached out very carefully and touched her hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just placing my hand lightly against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she inhaled, a trembling breath, the kind that feels like letting go of something you've held too tightly for too long. She stepped closer, so close that her coat brushed mine, so close that I could feel the warmth of her breath in the cool air. I didn't move. I didn't push. I only stayed. Her hand slid from mine to my forearm. A slow, intentional, undeniably intimate touch. And then, she leaned ever so slightly into my chest, resting her forehead near my collarbone. Not a collapse, just a surrender to being held. I wrapped my arms around her, softly, like I was holding something precious, because I was. Her voice came out quiet, almost a whisper against my shoulder. No one has to know. But it didn't sound like secrecy. It sounded like permission, like trust, like choosing something that felt true. I tightened my hold. Not possessively, just reassuringly. She exhaled, and I felt her weight settle. Not physically, but emotionally. Like for the first time, she was letting herself rest in someone else's presence. We didn't kiss. We didn't rush. We just stayed wrapped in each other. In the soft glow of the porch light, in the quiet of the world that had finally gone still enough to hear our hearts. It wasn't the moment everything changed. It was the moment we stopped pretending it hadn't already. We stood there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just holding on. The rain had softened into a quiet mist, the kind that settles into clothing and hair but not enough to draw attention to itself. It was late. The world around us dim and softened by the glow of street lamps. Everything felt muted, except the feeling of her in my arms. Eventually, she pulled back. Not because she wanted to leave the moment, but because she needed to face it fully. She kept her hands lightly on my arms, as though letting go too quickly might undo something that had finally opened. Her gaze lifted to mine, steady, clear, no more hesitation. But not recklessness either, just truth. I don't want to hide, she said softly. The words were slow, deliberate words she'd taken her time to choose. I don't want this to be something secret or fleeting. If it's real, it has to be real everywhere. I felt something settle inside me, something certain. I'm not going anywhere, I answered, just as quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a declaration shouted into the night. It was simple, grounded, true. She smiled small but full. The kind of smile that feels like being seen, like being chosen. Still. She looked away for a moment, her expression shifting into something more thoughtful, more vulnerable. But I need you to understand, she continued. My life is complicated. I have responsibilities, history, a son who comes first in everything I do. People who will question this, who may not understand it. Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't asking permission or apologizing. She was offering honesty. And I don't want you to feel like you're stepping into a life that's already halfway written, she said. I took her hand, gently, as though it had always been meant to rest in mine. I don't want something easy, I told her. I just want something true. She closed her eyes in that way she does when something reaches deeper than she expected. Then, she leaned forward very slowly and rested her forehead against mine. Not a kiss, something quieter. Something deeper, promise made in silence. When she finally spoke again, her voice was warm, not hesitant anymore. Then let's take it slow, she whispered. Let's not rush to define it. Let's just be in it. Together. Together, I echoed. We walked inside. Not holding hands, not clinging, just side by side, moving in the same direction now. No secrecy. No pretending we were imagining this. But no pressure to make it something larger than we could handle. Just two people choosing each other, gently, steadily, openly. Not a forbidden moment, not an escape, a beginning. And for the first time in a long while, for both of us, that was enough. If this story made you feel something, even if you can't fully name it yet, stay with it. Because love like this doesn't arrive loud. It arrives in a glance, a breath, a quiet no one has to know.